If you're buying a house, then you need to realize that delays in the closing process are very, very common. If somebody's telling you they're not, then that person is either lying to you or is naive and doesn't understand the process. So if you have a real estate agent or a loan officer or somebody involved in the process telling you that their closings always happen on time, delays are uncommon, that person's probably blowing smoke and not telling the truth. Unfortunately, there's so much regulation and bureaucracy involved in the closing process that at least one delay is almost inevitable. So you'll have usually a bank who is lending to the buyer. The bank has to follow all sorts of government regulations. It has its own bureaucracy and its own regulations and procedures, and they're not going to yield on any of those. All right. The buyer also needs to buy title insurance. So you're going to have an insurance company also involved in the process. And if they're not happy with something, if their underwriter has an issue, that's going to delay things. You have at least a couple of lawyers. So you have the buyer's lawyer and you have the seller's lawyer. And of course, lawyers are notoriously um, difficult to deal with, and they're going to be throwing their own issues into the closing, fighting over what are sometimes really meaningless things but can delay the closing. So just be ready for all of this. Um, and and like I said, it's almost impossible to do a closing and not run into some sort of an issue. Just to give you an example, I had a closing last week. I represented the buyer, and he was buying a house, and the seller was selling, and it was a short sale. This means that the amount of money that the seller was getting wasn't sufficient to cover the mortgage on the property, but the bank was going to allow the sale anyway, so long as we complied with all of their terms. Well, I set up my closing documents, and the seller's bank took issue with the way the numbers were set up. They were done correctly, but the bank wanted them changed. So I contacted my title insurance company because the insurance company needs to write the policy so the buyer can purchase the home. And they insisted that the HUD be set up the way I had done it originally. So the bank had one idea, the insurance company had another, and it was preventing a closing from happening. Now, the parties, the seller and the buyer, agreed to settle the matter outside of closing, which also violates lending regulations. So there's just too many regulations, too many procedures, too much bureaucracy for things to happen smoothly and for them to happen on time. And going into a closing, especially if it's your first closing, you need to realize that, or you're going to end up very frustrated. All right, so if you have any questions about the closing process, if you're buying or selling a house, please feel free to contact me and I'd be happy to help you out.